Greetings, salutations, and namaste. This drop is seasonally oriented to the holiday season, and 'tis the season also for retrogrades. So I'm in perfect split light to talk about Buddhaya, Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, as well as Virgo. Gemini is the twins, obviously, the dual personality, the split half. And I'm recording this on Ardra, which is the nakshatra that is central to Gemini and very much typifies the transformational energy of Bud, of Mercury, and this sign. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the moon and how these two planets work as a sort of duality between our mind, emotionally and analytically. So before I get into the ruminations and philosophical ramblings, I'll start with the practical info. Shadow periods. So if you've seen, actually the one video that probably got the most views, which is great because it's probably the most helpful, is about Mercury retrograde and shadow periods. And I think it's a couple of months back. But this one is going to be pertinent to the dates of retrograde, which are December 28th. And that is December 28th until January 17th of 2023 will be when Mercury is actually retrograde. What I'm going to talk about here now is the shadow period. So if you're not familiar with the shadow period, I talked about it in other videos. This is the time before and the time after a retrograde period, and how it informs the whole experience can be utilized in a practical, helpful way. For example, so the first set of dates to be aware of are the shadow period, which is December 12th till December 28th, when the retrograde begins. And how this works is Mercury will actually go backwards by degree to this point that corresponds to December 12th. And this is where, when Mercury ends its retrograde on the 17th, this is where Mercury will be. This period is basically going to be covered during the retrograde. So in other words, the holiday season is a great way to give an example of this. Say you buy something before Christmas. If you buy it before the 12th, you're pretty much clear. After December 12th, this will fall into the Mercury retrograde period. Now, everybody knows that Mercury rules electronics and like that sort of thing, communication. I'll talk a little bit more about Thoth and how Mercury rules the Akashic records, the place from whence we draw all of our understanding and knowledge. This idea that cultures the world over all draw from the same repository of ancient wisdom. This is what Mercury kind of covers. So back to Christmas and buying electronics. So if you say buy somebody a gift and they try and return it during Mercury retrograde, which begins December 28th until January 17th, they'll get something back during retrograde that won't necessarily function properly, if you will. So the best kind of advice I can give is if you're going to return something, wait until after January 17th when Mercury goes direct, and it will return over the next 2 to 3 weeks back to the degree point where it went retrograde on the 28th. And this is called the shadow return or the shadow retrace. So during this period, you can sort of revisit the things that maybe went a little haywire in the previous few weeks. And you don't need an astrologer to tell you about these shadow periods, because especially Mercury retrograde goes about 3 weeks during when it's actually retrograde. So if you go backwards a couple of weeks, that's the shadow period. So when you're looking at a retrograde date, just be aware that the 2 weeks before are affected big time. And then the 2 or 3 weeks after the retrograde ends, that's when, if things kind of fell apart, you can bring order from chaos. Okay, before I start another philosophical ramble, cosmic freestyle, I wanted to talk about the other retrograde that's happening, which may be even more impactful than Mercury, which is Mars. And I've talked about Mars in a couple of videos at this point. I don't know if anybody's feeling it, but if you've kind of experienced frustration, I guess is the nagging frustration series of them over the past few months, odds are that's Mars being retrograde. And the shadow period involved. The good news is that Mars and Mercury come out of retrograde around the same time in January. Mars comes out of retro on the 13th or the 12th, depending on where you are, and then Mercury on the 17th. So you've got basically that's your focal point for the shit show to balance out. Everybody visualize with me. What Mars is doing actually is it's retrograding in Taurus, Venus ruled, and it's actually, Mars casts three aspects, a fourth aspect, a seventh aspect, and an eighth aspect. It's casting its eighth aspect on Sagittarius, which is where Venus and Mercury currently are. Venus will make her way into Capricorn soon enough. Mercury, however, once it gets into Capricorn, will slide back and become retrograde in Sagittarius for that breadth of time. So it's going to be affected by this Mars eighth aspect for a good long while. These two are going to be communicating with each other and causing frustrations in communication. So that would be the major thing I'd say to look out for. New Year's Eve might be a shit show. Because Moon will be conjunct Rahu in Aries. So this is the north node of the Moon. This is the dragon head who just wants to obsess and eat and indulge. So everybody be careful out there. I just want to freestyle a bit on something that retrograde inspired me to think about, having to do with time. And this idea that time is linear, or maybe a fallacious idea is what I should say. Time is, in my opinion, and in a lot of stuff I've read, where I get my opinions from, is more of a spiral. And you can actually sort of see this articulated in the cycles of time. The Mayans have their cycle, which is probably the most famous. Plato talks about the great cycles. And of course, Vedic astrology has the Yuga Yoga, the Kali Yuga, the different time periods that we ascend and descend through over the course of what we call time, which is a three-dimensional concept that we need in order to, for this particular matrix, extinguish and manifest new karmas. I mean, it's not just about burning karmas, it's also about creating karmas. And the idea is to use dharma to create karma, dharma being righteous action. So that's why I talk to you guys, and I don't tell anybody in my other IRL life about in real life, yeah, that works, about this channel, because it gets my ego involved, and I just wanted to do stuff for dharma to help people I don't know, because people I don't know have helped me. So that's how this whole little cycle works. But yeah, this idea that time is linear, we think that forward progress is the name of the game. And it causes, I believe, the ennui or the existential crisis in a lot of people, because things circle back around on you. And this is the idea of the spiral coming into play. The spiral can be used, and that's the idea of the retrograde. The retrograde teaches us about the spiral. Quantum physics uses this idea of the spiral to theorize time travel. It's about just finding a place on the same loop that you went from, or that I won't get into quantum physics. Anyway, I'll stick to Vedic astrology for this one. What happens, I mentioned this in another post, with the retrograde, actually, in my opinion, is instead of the planets following the sun and the moon as the luminaries, it sort of switches gears to Rahu and Ketu, which are the north and south nodes of the moon. And they are in a constant retrograde motion, so they go backwards always. And so the planets start following their trajectory. And this is, Rahu and Ketu are direct links to our past lives, future lives, and otherwise. So, in other words, we are actually connecting with our karmas, even more so during the retrogrades. Your birthday is the day the sun is in the nakshatra and zodiac sign it was in when you were born. So every year, the moon is going to be in a different zodiac sign or nakshatra, except every 19 years. Now, this is phenomenal because what's actually happening is two things that shouldn't really go together. Your solar day, which is your birthday, and your lunar day actually become the same day again every 19 years. I can't explain it, but it speaks to this idea of the spiral and this cycle of loops that we're always experiencing. The lessons we're meant to learn by experiencing the same energies over and over and over. Here's the example, and it's a crazy one, but it just came to me. We just had a full moon in Rohini. So this is the first full moon after the lunar eclipse in Aries. So this is in Taurus. What's significant about full moons after the eclipses, the ones that come after, is this is the zodiac sign where the last series of eclipses was happening, and the axis, I should say. So, in other words, Taurus and Scorpio were where the last series of eclipses were happening in the last few years. Now, you'll just have to take my word for it, but if you go back to the eclipse in late 2020, it was in Rohini. So what was happening around late 2020 was a Senate runoff in the state of Georgia. It happened, around the Christmas time. Now what's happening, as the Rohini full moon just happened, a Georgia Senate runoff. With the same dude involved. This is what I'm saying. It's like I can only give data and then throw it out there for you guys to stew on, because this is what I do all day. But maybe the goal isn't for time to be this linear progression where we're constantly thinking we need to make forward progress, but rather this whole matrix experience is about transformation, and duality is part of that transformation. I actually talked about Thoth and Mercury being correlated. I may be a little off there, because the ruler of the natural 12th house, which is where the Akashic records are, is Jupiter. But then you start thinking about these houses, 12, 9, 6, 3, 3, 6, 9, 12. I'm not the first astrologer to talk about this particular thing, so I think KRS and a couple of other people have even talked about it. But Nikolai Tesla has all of his planets in what we call the mutable signs, which are Mercury and Jupiter ruled. They rule basically intelligence, intellect, and they also mutually aspect each other. So there's a constant relationship between these two planets. One being a sort of slower moving planet, and Mercury being a fast moving planet. And that's why I sort of think about it's the other half of the moon. The moon is our emotional mind. The moon moves very fast, and the planet that moves the second fastest is Mercury. Always this beautiful dichotomy anywhere you look in astrology. So I was talking about karmas before. There's actually a duality with karma as well. The ascendant has the karma of its own, which is separate from the moon's karma, and that's also separate from Mercury's karma. You're dealing with actually what I think Rudolph Steiner, who is a theosophist, anthroposophist, creator of the Waldorf School. For anybody who's looking for schooling alternatives these days, it's an option. But he talked about the spheres of the soul, and he said 8. And that actually is perfectly aligned with how many grahas plus the Rahu Ketu node. You got moon, sun, the 5 planets, that's 7. And then Rahu Ketu, which act as one axis of our previous and future karmas. So anyway, that's the cosmic freestyle digression. It's something to consider, though, that oftentimes we feel like things that are happening to us in our lives, they don't really match with. It's like one side is going this way and another side is going that way. Your ascendant, the actual avatar, the body, has its own karma that it's going to fulfill, and you as a soul negotiated with this avatar what you have to go through as its partner. And so you're experiencing all these other karmas this simultaneously, and they may not often synchronize perfectly. So this is the balance of transformation that Mercury, Jupiter teach us through this 3, 6, 9, 12. And there's the idea that, the spheres, the different, planets are actually like this radio play that's in everybody's head, that you have to meditate and either be doing something sports related or physically active to take your mind off of it. That's the planetary energy focusing in on your central nervous system through Mercury. And Mercury deciphers this. The moon decides how we feel about it. So this is kind of my messy way of trying to explain how this life is so messy. Everyone have a very happy holiday season. Have a blessed, safe holiday season, and love everyone that you can possibly love. Where you can make a friend where there was an enemy, I highly recommend it. Namaste.